So yeah, we've touched on the theme of climate justice, just transition in different ways today. And I can't match the optimism that James had in his presentation, but hopefully I can leave you with a couple of insights and provocations. So I'm approaching this through the lens of social movements. I started off my PhD wanting to compare environmental movements in India and Australia, coal being in question, coal being the context. How do I get into So basically coal being a strong focus of environmental movements at this point of time, and with declining use of coal in China, India and Australia emerging as the two remaining countries doing major coal developments, focuses on coal and coal power stations. So I chose two case studies. It's a strange feeling presenting this in this room where there have been people very close to and part of the case study I have looked at in India. I've looked at the resistance at Mahan, which was a grassroots community mobilization, but there was Greenpeace on the ground with them doing mobilization. And we know the political story of that. So I'm going to dwell less on the Indian case study, more on the Australian case study, which is the Stop Adani movement to the Carmichael coal mine in Galilee. So basically what I want to show you today, these are pictures from the movement in Mahan. What I basically want to come to is the critical differences I found within the mobilizations in India and Australia, of course, given the historic differences. I use the varieties of environmentalism and northern versus southern environmentalism frames to look at some of the critical differences. But the other point of difference I needed to remember was that there is a significant difference still between indigenous mobilizations in the global north versus the global south, as I have seen in Mahan versus the mobilization of the indigenous people in Queensland. So my premise is that how coal is being radicalized in India and Australia shows the difference between northern and southern environmentalisms and their contexts in the era of climate change. In the Australian case, it really was about a climate mass mobilization forming over the... I've been in Australia the last 11 years and I've seen the movement grow. Environmental groups, climate groups kind of moved towards a focus on keep coal in the ground and stop extraction of fossil fuels after Copenhagen, where the focus clearly shifted from the end of pipe approach to keep coal in the ground. So this is a picture from the climate strike in Melbourne in March this year, and national politics, policy, and climate denialism is challenged, and coal is in focus. So the Stop Adani movement in Australia, which became the uniting kind of force for many different local, regional, state level, and national issues, shows how climate became the unifying platform under which many different environmental concerns got together, and how and why the Adani mine became the center of focus. Because it was going to be the largest mine in the basin and the first one, that became the central focus. There have been some claims about racism. There are very different interpretations of why Adani, why not the name of the mine, and various things. But I think I just want to focus on the movement and how they have been able to come together, unite different fronts. So there's a Stop Adani movement which was started by the environmental groups, and a lot of grassroots groups got onto that. Within 2 weeks of officially registering the Stop Adani movement, they had some 200 to 300 local groups spring up everywhere. So some 7 or 8 years back, or even 10 years back, there used to be climate action groups, and then they went inactive. And then in many ways, after the Stop Adani formation, that became the single issue under which a lot of local groups once again energized, and new ones also came up. Sorry, I'm just going to come back to this in a second. But there were other resistances to Adani as well. And I actually look at them as different constituents mobilizing in different ways with different core issues. So we know to a certain extent about the indigenous resistance to Adani. The Wangan and Jagalungu traditional owners put in a claim to their native land in 2005. And 4 years after that, proposals for mines in the Galilee Basin started emerging. So they never got their native title claim, because coal suddenly became viable in the place where coal was always unviable because it was 300 kilometers from the coast. And Adani's proposal to build a rail line and carry the coal from the pit to the port actually opened the Galilee Basin up in terms of proposals. So that's the same year that Copenhagen was a failure, and environmental groups decided to shift their strategy from end-of-pipe approach to keep coal in the ground. So there's a coming together of different kinds of timelines. So the Wangan and Jagalungu's native title claim was never met, and they started a resistance. They started a legal challenge which drew out from many different legal cases against giving Adani their land, as opposed to the Forest Rights Act in India, which actually gives you the provision to say no to mining in a village council meeting. You don't have that kind of provision in the Native Title Act in Australia, where you cannot veto mining. There's a period of negotiation. If the negotiations fail, the company can go to the Native Title Tribunal and get them to give them a license for the land. They brought in a case of Adani having forged meetings and got consensus from non-family members, masquerading as family members. The issue dragged on for a long time. There were multiple legal challenges. All of them finally defeated. The Native Title Act was changed at a certain point after a decision had come in from another part of Australia to accommodate Adani. So after all these different political cycles and these ways of helping Adani on, their native title claim was removed recently for the coal mine to go ahead. But they also went international with their protests. They linked with indigenous resistances to fossil fuel in North America and Canada and the US. And there's the farmers in Queensland. Linda spoke about, and James also mentioned, the farmers in the Liverpool Plains in New South Wales. The difference between them and this mobilization, which started off as a response to the mines coming around Adani's mine and the various mines coming up in the Galilee Basin, is that they actually started off saying that climate change was an issue. And it was a combination of record drought, during which the government gave free water allocations to the Adani mine, and the fact that they feel completely disenfranchised in the political decision-making process, that they are willing to come in. They are conservative voters. They're willing to come in and say that, yes, we do believe in climate change, although it is something that the Greenies are working on. So there was a difference between the previous politics of groups of farmers that have mobilized in New South Wales, where they did not vocally or actively talk about whether they believe in climate change or not, versus the farmers in Queensland who came to this issue saying that, yes, we do believe in climate change, the government is actually disenfranchising us. So, I'll just continue. So what I see in Australia is that there are many, James was talking about many different fronts. I'm talking about many different constituents and communities coming to stopping a coal mine, which would open up an entire basin of coal. And they all finally do unite under the frame of climate justice, but they come to very different paths. There are the environmental organizations, the climate organizations, and their supporter bases who come to it with the issue of climate change clearly. There is the farmers who come to it who are constituents who are newly marginalized by the process of Australia's resource boom and opening up coal in areas where coal had previously not been opened up. And there is the indigenous resistance. The core issue remains historical disposition of land and redisposition in the era of mining boom, but they also seek and forge global solidarities with other indigenous groups, and they talk about indigenous climate justice. I'll just quickly brush through the Indian case and come back to the translation context. And if we have time, I'll go through some of Australia's coal politics and play a video. I'll just keep that for now, depending on.
3 minutes.
I have 3 more minutes. Okay. So in the Indian case, I mean, we know about the story of Mahan, we know about the crackdown on Greenpeace, we know about that political cycle. Basically, the fundamental difference is, I see that there is a huge gap or a fragmentation. There is no grand narrative of climate change in India with mobilization, of course. We don't have the Indian middle class mass mobilizing on climate change like we have in Australia. There is a fragmentation. On the ground, it is the Forest Rights Act. It is the new lexicon of rights that enters the local parlance, and people talk about their forest rights for the first time, and that gives them a reason to mobilize, apart from the fact that they also see that the state is completely with the company and not with them. So it's a gradual process of radicalization, and forest rights give them a newfound purpose for mobilization. At the national level, it is, again, there is no grand narrative on climate change, but it's a series of circumstances which lead to anti-coal activism being sympathized and discussed by civil society. And the bigger risk which forms an umbrella over these discussions is basically the crackdown on democracy. Democracy, civil rights, and the right to dissent. That becomes the unifying platform. This is from the IBO report, which focused on Greenpeace. So basically, crackdown on democratic rights and the removal of the right to dissent becomes a critical mobilizing umbrella for many different issues, and anti-coal activism gets discussed in a way it hasn't been before. So the critical differences, and this was of course the banner by Greenpeace after the crackdown. So if there are two ways I can look at it. I can look at it across the gap that exists between northern and southern contexts of environmentalism in this era of climate action and justice. And I can say that coal is challenged not just by northern environmentalisms, but by varieties of environmentalisms arising from different contexts. And the entire mosaic could perhaps present an integrated kind of north-south justice narrative. But the other critical issue really is, if it's an issue, is that while in Australia the various different fronts of resistance to Adani come together under the broader climate justice umbrella, in India they actually don't, simply because it's not what is a unifying narrative. Climate justice as a frame cannot be readily applied to the hundreds of livelihood struggles whose immediate concern is loss of lands and livelihood, and so was it in Mahan. It was framed under forest rights, which is what they were claiming. So in conclusion, the difference between the two cases point to critical north-south differences in environmentalism in the present era, and the malaise of land grab in the neoliberal era, now extending to renewable projects, can make clean development as anti-poor as dirty development. The principles of environmentalism, the core lessons for environmentalism globally, to strive to make the future energy landscape truly just. Can I just show a video for 2 seconds? Do you have internet?
I think so.
Okay. So I just want to leave you with a very well-made video. Loving coal. And this is the Australian Prime Minister, of course, as a treasurer, he brought a lump of coal into the parliament, showed it around because he thought coal was being hated too much. And these are, this is the Australian, which is a national newspaper, right center, and talking about the vision that Adani has for India with Australian coal. And this is a cartoon about how if they don't get that coal, they couldn't eat renewables. So I just want to leave you with a little bit. Yes. I'm going to expand and get the volume up. Can we get the volume up?
Yeah.
Just,
Fine.
can you just speak? Just move it. Just get the volume.
Volume is full.
It's only playing through there. Sorry, it's on the stage.
You can add the closed caption.
Where's that?
Bottom of the CC.
Just a second. This one.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Sorry, 30 seconds is taking over. So this video was put out by the Institute of Public Affairs, a right-wing think tank in Australia, funded by climate deniers, funds coming from us.
Carl, is this Carl with a C?
Yeah.
Are you
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And